They called it Thunder Run, a name more fitting for a gladiator's charge than a modern armored assault. But on that gray April morning in 2000 Ba, a column of American tanks did just that, roared into a city of 5 Trier people with a speed and fury that would shock the world. Within hours, the palaces of Saddam Hussein lay in ruins, his statues shattered, his capital occupied. And yet, in that moment of apparent victory, something darker began to take root. Was this the end of tyranny, or the beginning of something worse? Why did Baghdad fall so quickly? And what truly was lost when it did? It was 5:30 sáng, ngày 7 tháng 4. The highway leading into Baghdad was still cloaked in early morning haze. But parked silently on its edge was not just a convoy. It was an omen. 60 Abrams main battle tanks, 20 Bradley fighting vehicles, nearly 1.000 lính của sư đoàn bộ binh số 3 của quân đội Hoa Kỳ, dưới quyền đại tá David Perkins. Their mission? Not simply to raid, not to probe, but to plunge headfirst into the very heart of Saddam's regime. 2 days before, the same battalion had already pushed to Baghdad's airport in what would be dubbed the first Thunder Run. That operation revealed a surprising truth. The defenses of Baghdad were weaker than anticipated, disorganized, brittle. Perkins and his men believed they could end the war in a single thrust. But they weren't just fighting the Iraqi army, they were also fighting skepticism from their own side. Lieutenant General Scott Wallace, commander of V Corps, warned of the dangers. So did General Buford Blount, Perkins's superior. A large force driving into downtown Baghdad could be cut off, encircled, slaughtered. The specter of Black Hawk Down hung over every plan. And yet, Perkins pushed forward. His officers were told simply, "Tomorrow is our last big fight. Good luck." But the path to victory was not open. It was mined, literally. Just a mile from the staging point, a field of over 400 landmines lay strewn across Highway 8. Curiously, the Iraqis hadn't even bothered to bury them. Lieutenant Hypno's men combat engineers worked through the night, clearing them by hand, in silence. Some even dragged them aside using nothing more than tape and gloved hands, risking death with every movement. By dawn, a path had been carved. At 5:45, pháo binh Mỹ khai hỏa. UAVs had mapped Iraqi positions in advance. 12 Paladin 155mm howitzers opened the battle with precision strikes designed to clear the overpasses of Iraqi ambushers, without destroying the structures themselves. This time, America wasn't just charging forward. It was learning, adapting. The column began to move, up Highway 8, into a city still asleep, or pretending to be. But Baghdad was watching. On rooftops, behind shattered windows, beside smoldering bunkers, the remnants of Saddam's forces prepared to die where they stood, or at least to delay the inevitable. But the American column came with speed, precision, and overwhelming firepower. Wherever resistance emerged, it was met by Abrams cannons and 25mm chain guns. Some Iraqi fighters attempted to retake bunkers, cleared 2 days earlier. They were blasted into silence. One by one, the critical overpasses, Curly, Mo, were cleared with airburst shells detonating just 10 meters above the concrete. Staff Sergeant Joe Bell saw a bizarre scene amid the battle. Iraqi soldiers trying to tow away a burned American Abrams using a Soviet recovery vehicle. He ordered fire. A .50 caliber burst, then a heat round. The vehicle exploded in flame. Moments later, vengeance. An RPG slammed into Bell's tank. Another struck the engine compartment. Flames erupted, then vanished, quenched by the tank's suppression system. But the Abrams was now dead on the roadside. And yet the column did not stop. They were under orders. Keep moving, no matter what. Bell and his crew would be rescued later. For now, they watched the rest of the Thunder Run roll past them toward the city's dark heart. Downtown Baghdad. Objective: the Republican Palace. With each mile, the resistance grew. More RPGs, more gunfire, more roadside ambushes. But the Americans pushed through. Then came the break. At Objective Mo, instead of turning left toward the airport, Colonel Perkins made his call. He turned right, towards downtown, towards Saddam. Over radio, Brigadier General Lloyd Austin demanded to know what was happening. Perkins replied simply, "Sir, I am heading downtown." The decision shocked headquarters. It thrilled some, terrified others. But the gamble was on. Captain Conroy's tank led the way into the Monument District. There, 2 Iraqi BMPs began rotating their turrets at the convoy. He acted first. So did a nearby Abrams. 2 shots, 2 kills. Both BMPs destroyed. One turret blew completely off its chassis, arcing into the air like a decapitated head. Colonel Schwartz and his men reached the Victory Arch, the infamous crossed swords that loomed over Saddam's military parades. Now, they belonged to the enemy. At the same time, other elements smashed through the gates of the Republican Palace. Cameras rolled. The world watched. And then came the final symbol. A statue of Saddam, equestrian and proud, stood defiant. Colonel Perkins ordered it destroyed. Captain Conroy told his gunner, "Just make sure you hit the damn thing." The round landed true. The statue crumpled to the earth. And with it, an era ended. But not quite. Even as the 2nd Brigade combat team entrenched itself in the heart of Baghdad, the real battle was just beginning. Because miles behind them, the supply line was unraveling. Only a few hundred men guarded 6 miles of exposed highway. Captain Hornbuckle, with just 80 soldiers, was holding Objective Curly, a vital interchange, and he was surrounded. Iraqi forces regulars, foreign fighters, desperate loyalists launched a coordinated 360-degree assault. The kind of engagement the Pentagon had feared from the start. Wave after wave of technicals, trucks, even motorcycles charged at the American Bradleys. Hornbuckle's men stood fast. But after hours of fighting, their ammunition was nearly gone. And then, the worst news. The brigade's Tactical Operations Center had been hit directly by an Iraqi surface-to-surface missile. 17 vehicles destroyed, 5 Americans killed, 17 wounded. Hornbuckle's men could no longer call for air support. They were alone. Resupply or die. Colonel Perkins had no choice. He ordered a daring supply run the R2 convoy to break through to the embattled outposts. Led by Captain Joe O. Bailey, 17 trucks set off under fire. RPGs, mortars, machine guns. 2 Americans were killed. Trucks exploded. Vehicles crashed. And yet, the convoy reached Objective Curly. They began unloading ammunition. Under fire. Amid flames. Then disaster. An RPG hit one of the ammo trucks. Explosion. Fireball. Then a chain reaction. 4 more trucks detonated. The convoy barely survived. Miraculously. No one else died in that blast. But the cost was only beginning. The perimeter at Objective Curly was holding, but only barely. Captain Hornbuckle's exhausted soldiers had been under assault for over 6 days. Bodies littered the road, burnt-out technicals, twisted motorcycles, and human remains scattered across the asphalt like the ruins of a failed charge. Their radios crackled, voices rasped, ammunition clips clicked into empty chambers. Then, another problem. Friendly fire. As the 2nd Battalion of the 7th Infantry Regiment moved up to reinforce Curly, confusion reigned. Their lead, Bradley, mistook a detachment of U.S. Special Forces for enemy technicals. Gunfire erupted. 1 vehicle was destroyed, another badly damaged. Orange identification panels fluttered desperately in the dust. Arms waved. Shouts rose above the chaos. No Americans were killed, but it was a chilling reminder. Even among the victors, death could come from your own side. Once contact was clarified, the 2nd 7th surged into the area, finally giving Hornbuckle's men the relief they needed. Those still able piled into the remaining R2 trucks and were pulled from the front, leaving the 2nd 7th to dig in. The fighting at Curly brutal and relentless, would result in over 40 American wounded and the deaths of Sergeants Marshall and Stever. Iraqi casualties were estimated between 350 and 500, a ghastly toll. But this was not a war that gave medals for body counts. Downtown Baghdad, a city still fighting. Back in the heart of Baghdad, Colonel Perkins and his men had seized their objective, but they were not resting. The city was resisting in patches tenaciously, violently, irrationally. Fedayeen fighters launched sporadic attacks on U.S. positions. Mortars fell on palace grounds. Buildings once thought empty came alive with sniper fire. Fuel was low. Ammunition was dwindling. The enemy was not retreating, it was morphing. Still, Perkins made his choice. Stay, dig in, hold the palace, hold the symbol. The Second Thunder Run had not just punched through Baghdad, it had planted the flag of inevitability. Elsewhere, General Mattis and his Marines were advancing from the east bank of the Tigris River. Coordination between Army and Marine units tightened the noose around what was left of Saddam's inner defenses. But the biggest threat was not outside. It was inside the American lines, in the exhaustion, the chaos, the logistical strain. Baghdad was falling, yes, but it wasn't collapsing, it was bleeding out. Slowly. The Battle of Bakba. Mattis moves first. Even as downtown Baghdad convulsed in its final spasms, General Mattis turned his attention elsewhere. To the north, the town of Bakba, 30 miles from the capital. A known staging ground for Republican Guard forces and a potential launch pad for a counterattack. Mattis would not wait. He sent Alpha Company of the 1st Recon Battalion, 80 Marines, 15 Humvees into the fields outside Bakba. At first, all seemed quiet. Shepherds, sheep, a canal running along the edge of the field. The Marines dismounted to recon. The radios hummed with routine chatter. Then, hell broke loose. A mortar barrage exploded around them. Captain Brian Patterson was thrown against his Humvee. Within seconds, over 150 Iraqi soldiers opened fire, not militias this time, but organized, dug-in troops. Tracers laced through the air. A BMP-1 emerged, its 73mm gun targeting the Marines. They were outnumbered, pinned, exposed, air support. Almost a disaster. In desperation, forward air controllers called in a strike from an F-15 Strike Eagle. The jet screamed across the sky. The Marines on the ground watched it bank into an attack run. Then horror. The bomb dropped. Too close. It missed by a full kilometer, exploding just 200 yards away from the Marines. The shockwave shattered eardrums. Dust and debris rained down. Swearing filled the radios. The U.S. Air Force had nearly killed its own men. But the F-15 returned this time, on target. The BMP exploded in a column of smoke and flame. Then came the Cobra's U.S. attack helicopters, their cannons raking through Iraqi trenches. Hellfire missiles streaking into bunkers. The tide turned. Slowly, painfully. Alpha Company began a bounding advance fire and maneuver against a still-burning enemy line. A Mark 19 gunner fired over 250 rounds. Snipers picked off isolated defenders. Corporal Ray Peon muttered, "Beat sitting around while everyone else gets to have fun." Within 2 Zo, resistance crumbled. Iraqis broke. They ran. The Marines pursued, clearing Bakba and continuing 10 kilometers further before halting. Incredibly, only 1 Marine had been slightly wounded. In return, they left hundreds of enemy fighters dead, securing Baghdad, the illusion of victory. While Bakba fell, Baghdad was being secured. At least, that was the term the Pentagon used. The last holdouts of Ba'athist resistance were flushed out by the Marines and 5th Corps units. By the night of the 7th of April, American forces controlled the capital. Crowds poured into the streets. Statues were toppled. Portraits of Saddam were burned, defaced, or dragged through the dust. It felt like liberation. But beneath the surface, things were cracking. The Iraqi army dissolved. Most of its soldiers disappeared, not captured, not killed. They simply went home, melted into the crowds. Over the next 4 days, the cities of Kut and Tikrit fell without resistance. By May 1, President George W. Bush declared the end of major combat operations. But there were no weapons. The entire premise of the invasion, Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, was unraveling. Specialized WMD teams scoured the country. They found nothing of significance. A few degraded mustard gas shells, relics from the Iran-Iraq War. Low-yield uranium at the Tuatha nuclear site, far too little for any bomb. The casus belli had collapsed. And yet, the war was won. Or was it? Casualties and cost. In just 26 days of ground combat, the U.S. lost 139 American soldiers, 33 British soldiers, over 500 wounded. The Iraqi toll? Estimated between 7,600 and 45,000 fighters. At least 7,269 civilians dead. The numbers are staggering. But what was not counted, what could not be counted, was what followed. The disbanding, a fatal mistake. After Saddam's regime fell, the coalition made a fateful decision. They disbanded the Iraqi army. They dissolved the Ba'athist government structures. They left a vacuum, and into that vacuum poured chaos, looting, lawlessness, and something worse, insurgency. Foreign fighters, once in hiding, now blended into the population. Weapons, once locked in armories, flooded the streets. Within months, the American troops who had left Iraq would be returning, not as invaders, but as counterinsurgents. The war had changed. And Baghdad, once the symbol of victory, would become a city of endless ambushes, roadside bombs, and shattered illusions. Legacy. An unfinished chapter. Saddam was captured on the 13th of December, 2000 Lay-Ba. He was tried, convicted, executed in December 2000 Lay-Sao. But the war he left behind never really ended. The ghosts of Thunder Run, of Objective Curly, of Bakba, of the palace gates still whisper beneath the dust of Iraq. The question that remains is not how Baghdad fell, but whether it ever truly stood again. They came with thunder, 60 tanks, 20 Tam Bradleys, a single route into the heart of an empire. And they won at least on paper. But in war, paper burns fast. Thunder Run is remembered as a triumph of American maneuver warfare, a surgical strike that decapitated a regime in a matter of hours. But what followed was neither planned, nor clean, nor just. The statues fell, the crowds cheered, but then the lights went out. The fires began, and a different kind of war was born. One without front lines, without rules, without end. Saddam was gone, but the chaos he left behind was just beginning to feed. By dissolving the Iraqi army, the coalition had also dissolved control. What filled the void wasn't democracy, but desperation. Warlords, militias, foreign fighters, sectarian death squads. And the men who had driven tanks down Highway 8, many would return to Baghdad again, but this time, not as conquerors. They would return to face ambushes in alleyways they once rolled through with confidence. They would fight to hold streets they once assumed were already won. The irony is cruel. Thunder Run proved what America could do. But what happened next revealed what it didn't understand. Perhaps Baghdad was never truly meant to fall in a day. Perhaps it never really did. Empires don't collapse when their armies lose the field. They collapse when they misunderstand what follows victory. And so the question remains, was this a triumph of military genius or the first step toward a generation of war? The dust has settled. The tanks have gone. But Baghdad is still waiting for its peace. If you want to uncover more buried moments like this, turning points forgotten, legacies unfinished, consider subscribing to Legacy Files. Because history doesn't repeat. It waits to be understood.